Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sam Robinson, and I am the Gnostic syncretist, and this is the Gnostic syncretist podcast. Thank you for joining us tonight. In our last video, we were talking mostly. I was talking mostly about mass surveillance systems in America and in the milieu of the Western civilizations and their alleged democracies. And I'm not going to go into that again tonight, but how it relates to all the esoteric spiritual frameworks that I have been putting out on this channel over the years is very specifically to the nature of humanity's path for spiritual evolution and whether we continue on that path or whether that path takes a detour, one not of our own choosing, but chosen for us by the oligarchical elite technocrats and those that support them, and the transhumanists that are in the background of all that. Humanity's spiritual evolutionary path, according to almost all the, really according to all the esoteric traditions, is a very pivotal concept. And I've tried to delineate it as best as I could over the last few years. And I hope I've done a good job. But as things continue to stare humanity in the face, from alleged artificial intelligence, wars and rumors of wars, mass surveillance systems being implemented and erected everywhere with or without our consent, and a total system, a totalitarian system of digitalization and control and surveillance all of that applies to whether or not we are capable in the collective, as well as on the individual level, of fulfilling the evolution of spirituality that we are capable of actually going through as a race of spiritually endowed beings. There are a multitude of misdirections and divergent paths that the elite and the archons, or the harmonic forces, whatever you want to call them, are bent on taking us down as opposed to spiritually evolving. They don't want us to spiritually evolve. They are most afraid of humanity collectively evolving spiritually beyond the reach of their control systems. I'm specifically talking about the non-physical forces, such as the archons, the harmonic forces, whatever you want to call them. I typically sometimes call them either one of those terms. They are trying to erect the eighth sphere, and I've gone over the eighth sphere in previous podcasts. But for those who are not familiar with the concept of the eighth sphere, it comes from the esoteric mystery school traditions of the 19th and 20th centuries, from anthroposophy and Rosicrucianism and theosophy. Blavatsky briefly mentioned it. Rudolf Steiner talked about it, and so did several other, like the guy who used a pseudonym but wrote what's called The Transcendental Universe. It's a book from, I think 1896, where he talked about it as well. Now, no one knows that was the guy's real name. I can't remember his name for the life of me right now, but I have it on my shelf behind me. Either way, the eighth sphere was mentioned by all these individuals who were part of the occult Renaissance period that, basically goes from, say, 1850, 60 through 1950 or 1945, however you want to look at it, the end of World War II. And for the most part, very few people would speak on this topic, the eighth sphere. And those that did it in an extremely reserved fashion, barely releasing crumbs of information about this topic. But as people have continued to put together the various crumbs over the years, like Dark Journalist and Gigi Young and others, um, a picture begins to emerge that is highly related um, to our current events. Whether you're in America, whether in the EU or Britain or Australia or anywhere, India, Africa, Russia, China, it relates in the sense that the eighth sphere is this, it's not even hypothetical, it is a hypothesized aspect of the cosmos that is almost like a an inverted or negative dimensional doppelganger to the earth that is in the process of essentially being formed at this time. And it is often been termed the dumping ground or garbage heap of cosmic evolution. And therefore, a lot of entities that failed their evolution, aspects of cosmic evolution in terms of matter, whether it's esoteric, astral, physical types of matter, they all, whatever has been used up and is no longer functional according to the grand scheme of macrocosmic evolution, which there is a scheme. I've gone over that scheme. That all those things, whether they're entities or basically garbage matter, end up in the eighth sphere. And the eighth sphere is drawn as essentially a doppelganger of Earth, but it's not on the physical plane. It is just beyond the physical plane, kind of in the lower astral dimension, lower astral plane. And what resides there are things like archons and harmonic forces and luciferic forces, and these are a plethora of entities that are absolutely and fully bent on making sure humanity does not evolve beyond their influence. And so thus they have, in a certain sense, allied themselves with dark occultists and Silicon Valley technocrats, whether they know it or not. I'm not sure. I think someone like maybe Peter Thiel would probably know it. And they have either offered them knowledge or offered them um, concepts about technology, or they simply just are some sort of spiritual parasite that influences the patterns of thought and action among these elite dystopian members of our world society that are driving us towards a evolutionary path that will be fully non-spiritual, that will be incapable of what I would call self-spiritual actualization. And let there be no mistake, they are driving us very quickly towards that state where we will either merge with machines, become transhuman, or maybe only the elite will become transhuman, but they will at the least give us some bare bones technologies that are enabled to be put within the body and modify and, so to speak, augment the body with artificial intelligence or just what some people have called etheric technologies. Either way, it is a blaspheming of the human form. And the human form has been specifically designed and spiritually evolved over eons to be our vehicle of expression for all the other spiritual bodies, the astral body, the etheric body, the mental body, the you know the spirit and the spiritual soul. All these things have been built into and are utilized by the physical vehicle of expression, which is our personal body, physical body of matter. And it is an extremely and highly evolved vehicle. It is the most evolved of all the vehicles that you have at your disposal. The physical one is the most highly evolved of all your bodies. That is a fact. Doesn't matter whether you want to believe that or not. It is the most evolved. The next most evolved will be the etheric body. And after that, the astral body. And then the mental body is still in development. And we're not even really able to actually fully access the higher mental body, which is the other, essentially the grander half of the currently developing mental body. All these are within the physical vehicle of expression for all the rest of these bodies to be utilized, and to desecrate the physical body through technological insertion into it will utterly cut you off from accessing the rest of those bodies to a certain degree. And if done in a large degree, I would have to assume that that individual who is so enmeshed with machines, which is, by the way, made of matter, you are basically degrading and downgrading your being by inserting technologies. You're not becoming evolved, you're becoming devolved in the greatest sense you can possibly imagine. So, but besides that, besides transhumanism, there are other concerns evolving before us in current events in America, in the West, in alleged democracies, and the golden age of Donald J. Trump and all the technocrats behind him. Oh man, there are so many. It's 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 exactly as expected, to be honest. Elon Musk is hiding in the shadows wherever he is. He is working for the Department of Defense and DARPA and running the space programs. And, Teslas are becoming extremely prevalent. I see them everywhere, even those stupid Cybertrucks, which are literally look like they came from a PlayStation 1 game from back in the 90s, where they look terrible. They're terrible, like graphically terrible. Yet people buy them, and they're not really a good truck. A truck is a hauling vehicle, either way. The point being, self-driving cars are coming, potentially. See if they can get that off the ground. And so is mass surveillance. Well, mass surveillance is practically nearly here in America with flock cameras and license plate readers and biometric facial recognition technology at the border and being spread at the airport and elsewhere. Most people don't even know. I mean, I just went to Portland the other last June, like several weeks ago, almost a month ago now. And each time I went to the airport where they have this facial recognition technology, almost nobody opts out. I was the only one that demanded to opt out. And you are still currently allowed to opt out, by the way. Most people don't know this because I don't see them doing it. They all just, no matter what they look like, what they're dressed like, how elegant or lack thereof, every person that I saw, from whatever background, whatever color, whatever race, whatever level of education, every one of them opted in to be scanned. When all you have to do is say, no, I do not want to be scanned. And they will shut the camera off and you will hand over your ID and they'll do it the normal way. Because obviously there's no need to do it any other way. It's worked for decades. Yet I didn't see anybody else doing it. I was the only one, both ways, going to Portland and coming back. Point being, all these technologies, whether it's mass surveillance technologies, whether it's 5G and 6G technologies, whether it's facial recognition and biometric scanning, all of them are interfering with your various superphysical bodies and spiritual evolution, period. Because there is a grid of electromagnetic frequency and resonance, totally diversion and disharmonic with Earth's natural Schumann resonance and frequencies. And it is becoming a wash, and it's already saturated in a lot of places with these artificial electromagnetic frequencies and resonances that are not part of the natural biospheric order, are not part of Earth's natural frequencies. And we are not the only ones being impacted. Animals are clearly being impacted, insects are being impacted, birds are being impacted. All life forms that are being saturated with these frequencies are being impacted. For example, most people think that the bees are having issues due to pesticides. And while that probably is also the case, it is clearly the least mentioned case, though the most serious, is that the electromagnetic frequency waves being emitted into our environment all over the place, and that is um, washing through the entirety of the ecosystem, is fully affecting bees and distorting their frequency, along with birds. They rely on these frequencies because we evolved with the earth, they evolved with the earth, and we evolved within the magnetospheric frequencies of our planet, Gaia Sophia. And Gaia is being transformed while we're also being transformed by these same technocratic, psychotic elites that are trying to fully saturate, at least from what I can tell, fully saturate the entirety of the sphere, the geosphere of Earth, with artificial frequencies and electromagnetic energy and radiation. And it is extremely harmful and creates just a staggering, unparalleled disharmony within our own bodies and in relation to ourselves and each other, and in relation to our environment and ourselves, as well as simply between animals and their environment, not to mention us and them as well. So there's no doubt about this. It is unequivocal that as they continue to increase the level of the G's, what we have already is bad enough, clearly, but it is going to get worse as we continue to erect these systems of artificial electromagnetic frequencies, which entirely, at least at best, simply stunts our spiritual evolutionary path. At worst, it will completely diverge us away from it and lead to our own de-evolution as opposed to evolution. And I'm not clearly, once again, I have not made this statement. I'm not talking about Darwinian evolution here. I'm talking about cosmic spiritual evolution that comes from the different mystery schools like Rosicrucianism and Theosophy and Anthroposophy and the ancient mystery school traditions as well. But those first three are the most noteworthy for describing it in extreme detail, which I've done videos on. To properly evolve, our environment must stay natural. And we, as physical beings, must remain as natural and holistically aligned with our environment as we can, which clearly is becoming harder and harder by the day due to frankenfoods and artificial radiation and frequencies, the stuff that's in the water, the stuff that's in the sky, you name it. I mean, we're being attacked on all levels. There's no question about that. However, there are mitigating actions that you can take as an individual to minimize some of these harmful aspects of our current world systems environment that is being erected around us and you know fed to us and sprayed on us by people without any care in the world about our spiritual evolution, much less our lives. They have much bigger agendas, whether they're military, whether they're technocratic, whether they're transhumanist, whether they're economic or financial, regardless of their special area of design. And whether they're working together or whether they're working separately, I'm clearly of the mind that a large part of them are working in tandem to create a certain type of world order. However, I'm willing to engage the idea that some of them have their own individualized agendas separate from this world order, one world government system that they would like to create, such as the U.S. military. How, who knows why they spray things? Who knows why they feed us horrendously toxic food and medicine and water that is clearly contaminated with all sorts of heavy plastics and metals and fluoride and you name it. Clearly, someone's making a lot of money, and some people would like to believe that's all it is. On another level, however, on a spiritually esoteric level, they are trying to degrade the spiritual physical body from being able, likely to evolve. The greatest thing that they fear is a collective awakening, obviously, but they also fear even individuals being able to spiritually evolve beyond their control. Not to mention these non physical entities that would lose access to the ones that are able to evolve beyond their control and their influence. And that can be done. I know it. I know it can be done. I fully believe it can be done because I mean, just let's play devil's advocate. Why else, if it can't be done, why else would so many powerful physical and non-physical individuals, beings, institutions, governments, militaries, think tanks, banks, international financiers, international technocrats, and the eighth sphere level entities? Why else would all of these factions and forces be arrayed against humanity and the individual human being on so many fronts, on so many levels, in every field of human existence, from the environment to the air to the etheric to the astral emotional field to get inside the physical inside of the body, to saturating not only us but the entirety of the environment of the biosphere and all of its creatures with an extremely harmful, disharmonic radiation and frequencies that will utterly disrupt and change the evolutionary tract of all beings on this planet. Why else would they do that? If it's not true that we can evolve beyond it, why are they in such a frenzy, a seemingly headlong rush towards Agenda 2030 and the erection of all these technologies under Trump as fast as you can blink an eye? Why else would they be doing it if they do not fear humanity growing beyond their control spiritually and growing beyond their control conceptually and growing beyond their control astro etherically? Why else would these beings be these spiritual parasites be so heavily attacking humanity? Why else would the ones that are linked to them, the dystopian oligarchical and transnational elite classes of the world and the technocrats, why would they be working so hard, whether it's for them or for those entities or for themselves, if not for the fact that they utterly fear greatly the expanded awareness and spiritual perceptual awakening of large parts of the human species before they are capable of erecting their totalitarian control system of surveillance and artificial frequency control and modulation across the entire biosphere. Well, I have to say, the level of effort that they're putting in as quickly as they're doing it since this decade started in 2020, it leaves me with absolutely no doubt that they fear that 100%, 150%. These eighth spheric entities, like the archons and the harmonic forces and the loose spheric forces, Yaldabaoth, whoever they are, they're definitely out there. But they and the technocrats that are aiding them, unknowingly or not, are clearly extraordinarily afraid, to say the least, of us evolving beyond their control. Because there's so many of us, if you believe the numbers, obviously, of roughly 8 billion people. But even if you don't, clearly, depopulation is one of their biggest things, biggest agendas. Now, why the entities would want depopulation, I haven't fully figured that out yet. But why the elites would is quite obvious. All you have to go back to is the concept from Thomas Malthus and Malthusianism back from the 1830s and 20s, which has been carried on by the reigning American and European elite for quite a long time. They've remained allied with the concepts of Thomas Malthus, which see obviously limited resources on Earth, and that those are their resources and not our resources, and they are afraid we will take them. That we will basically strip control of lots of natural resources from their hands if we're not depopulated. Now they've largely failed to depopulate the Earth, obviously, because some of these plans started in the 70s, and there's twice as many people since the 70s alive on Earth allegedly as there were then. However, obviously through the medical industrial complex and pollutants and the war between the sexes, which is a video I've done, the war between men and women, which comes through radical social engineering of men against women, turning the internal energetic polarities of men and women into their opposite, basically creating energetic inversion within men and women's spiritual bodies and spiritual concepts and ideas relating to themselves and to their sex, which then reverses the way they not only look to one another and themselves, but to the other sex. Men are becoming more like women in terms of not all men, obviously, but there has been a radical social engineering scheme to make women like men and men like women in cultural ways, sociological ways, psychological ways, psychospiritual ways, to where if you can basically invert their natural polarities of their spiritual bodies, it will create enormous levels of disharmony between the population's reproductive patterns. And you could basically create a social cultural scenario where we don't reproduce very much, which has obviously been the case, at least in the West. Then you top that off with all the nasty things we have been imbibing, whether medically, agriculturally, or through the water. And you've got sperm counts plummeting. You've got infertility on the rise. You've got birth rates drastically lower than the natural rate of reproduction, which is, I think, 2.1? Like in America, it's 1.7. So the basic keep things at the same level stage is we're well below that stage, which is a rate of reproduction at 2. I think it's called 2. I think it's 2.1. In America, we're now at 1.7. And if I gotta say, I gotta tell you, I think something that happened in the last 5 years, specifically the first few years of the 2020s, and what was done to people, had a large part to play in infertility and the inability to reproduce and human reproductivity in general. Because before 2020, what did you hear around the world? Oh, the human population is just absolutely exploding. We have to slow down the birth rate. What are you hearing now in the last few years? I don't know what you hear, but the articles that you read that I read on a regular basis now tell the exact opposite tale. We're in a population crisis, one that's a depopulation crisis, they allege. But before 2020, they said something else entirely. Now they're not even worried about overpopulation into the near future, they say. They're more worried about reproductive rates falling far below the baseline. That's what they claim. Of course, they don't tell you why, and I'm not going to go into why. If you caught on to what I was saying a minute ago about something that, started in 2021 and continued for the next few years, something that was added, a foreign agent added to the body of a large portion of humanity, over 6 billion of them, it had something to do with that, you know. And I'll leave it at that. If you've done your research, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And so these forces as a whole, the archons, the armormons, the luciferic forces, the hyperdimensional superphysical parasitic entities, the technocrats, the oligarchs, the bankers, the transhumanists, whatever you want to, all of them together or all of them separately, they are absolutely hell-bent on de-evolution of the human species and a tight-knit, totalitarian, artificially engineered, frequency-based biospheric environment of complete control through digitalization and artificial frequencies and electromagnetic radiations. Now, even if you don't think about humanity, you need to think about all the animals on planet Earth because they're going to be within that system as well if they can survive. So, from what I'm seeing, since the Trump administration took off, which had nothing to do with spiritual evolution, obviously, he never claimed to save. He was going to save America, right? Not our spiritual evolutionary path, clearly, but against everything that he claimed to be for, and I could have told you, he was full of it back then, like I did 10 years ago. Though he's really shown his true colors now. Um, the man is either completely owned, blackmailed, or wanted in on it, or was always in on it, and was a total third party plant candidate, alleged outsider. Either way, the level of transhumanist and artificial intelligence and technocratic projects that he's unleashed on the human public and population is astounding in its breadth, depth, and speed. Don't forget, who did Operation Warp Speed? Donald J. Trump, ladies and gentlemen. Oh yeah, people want to act like that was Biden who made that thing happen. Yeah, Biden oversaw the second phase. Warp Speed was all him, and he's definitely been erecting our technocratic artificial environment of you know spiritual de-evolution at hyper speed, at warp speed, so to speak, with the likes of Peter Thiel and all these other billionaire technocratic Silicon Valley artificial intelligence psychos erecting this system. And it's not good. However, they need your consent in a large sense for these types of occultic endeavors. That's the facts. They cannot do all of it without actually having your actual consent, spiritually speaking, esoterically, astral, etherically speaking. They need your consent, whether you know you've given it or not. Actually, that is the way they do it. Some people call it what do they call it? Um, Externalization of the hierarchy, um, subliminal programming or pre-programming, You know, they have anyone who's done a large degree of in-depth research, even if they didn't do it into the occult aspects of all this, which is the most important, but everything else besides that, get to the point where they realize that for some reason, and their reason is an occult reason, they have to actually tell you what they're going to do to you. They have to tell you in some form, in some fashion. They will tell you. They have to. Now, my explanation for that, well, many people don't necessarily have an explanation. My explanation for that, and some other people have said this as well, like Mark Passio, is they get some sort of karmic um, mitigation from actually involving you in your own destruction as an individual and as a race, as a species, so that when they tell you and you didn't figure it out, when they left you all the breadcrumb trails to figure it out, and you can technically opt out. Now there might be severe repercussions for opting out, obviously, but they cannot devolve you without your consent. They can put you in an environment which becomes extremely difficult to evolve spiritually, obviously, but they can't put it. I mean, nobody was personally held down and altered with medical products. You had to choose. You had to take it. You had to choose to take it. They didn't make you take anything ever, and they won't. I mean, some places it's yet to be seen whether they would do that, but they didn't do that, and that's because they wanted you to do it to yourselves or convince others to do it to themselves for whatever reason, socioculturally reason. They need your consent in these types of mass occult rituals of great psychospiritual changes in the human race or in a large population, such as an entire country worth of people. They need your consent, and they will engineer a way to, in a certain sense, present you with guide rails, like a social cultural schematic and pathway towards your own consenting destruction, and in an occult sense. And you have to either take it or you can refuse. You can reject them and say absolutely not. Now, you may have all sorts of consequences from doing that, just like I did in the early 2020s. Your family will, you know, isolate you. You or your friends and coworkers will disassociate or attack you. There'll be massive social cultural repercussions for standing your ground, being a true spiritual sovereign individual against such occult mass ritual practices, because that's what they are. They are mass psychospiritual occultic rituals on a population. That's what that was. And they've done other ones, but ones that big are rare. Obviously, for that to work, because we're all spiritual beings here, we all have a level of astroetheric energy and power, whether it's latent or not, and involving you in the actual occult ritual and practice unknowingly activates that latent potential and involves you and their mass spell, their occult ritual spell. And then you are involved and you are affected through yourself, through doing what they would need you to do out of fear, out of anxiety, out of social pressure, out of peer pressure, out of needing to make a living, whatever it was, whatever it is. If they can get you to become internally compromised and activate that latent spiritual power and involve it in their rituals on a mass level or even on an individual level, obviously, because not everything's a mass occult ritual on an entire population. A lot of them are just little mini rituals that they convince us all to do in our little, digital silos and ecosystems and echo chambers all over the internet. Um, it's become hyper personalized and a hyper insulating digital prison for the self that it's chosen by the individual. Now, there's tons of programming that goes into you making those choices that you are unaware of that comes from the programming of the actual social media systems themselves, like dopamine feedback loops, things like that, that you are unaware of. But you can always opt out of creating your own prison and joining those prisons that they have left out for you to see if you will fall into them or not. You can always fall back out of them again. You don't have to engage with social media. You don't have to engage with the radicalized digital prison ecosystems of dopamine feedback back looping cultural garbage heaps that are X and Instagram and Twitter and what's the other one? TikTok, or even just endless scrolling. All of that is a choice. Now, they definitely engineer every aspect of it into their favor. But you remain sovereign. You remain spiritually, evolutionarily sovereign as an individual being endowed with divinity and spiritual perception at your beck and call if you so choose. And you can always opt out. That's the thing I want people to understand is, and honestly, on a cultural level, I'm seeing a lot of people start to opt out. I'm seeing people attack flock cameras, attack, digital identification systems, attacking mass surveillance and ALPRs, which are license plate reading systems, basically. I have not seen people opt out at the airport on biometric facial recognition when it says it on a sign right there. They don't ever do it. All they have to do is step aside, show their ID, and say no. But they are cutting down flock camera systems. They are doing all sorts of things to these mass surveillance systems. They are also in an uproar about artificial intelligence data centers and are on a local level attacking back. Now, all these things are obviously harming our spiritual evolution. But humanity needs to realize that that is a large, the most prominent aspect of what we will lose if we don't exert our sovereignty as individuals against those that would seek to take it away. Because they can't really take it away. They can convince you to give it up. They can't just take it. Your sovereignty is always yours. And there may be consequences for acting sovereign in many situations, but you always have the ability to remain sovereign until death. And then you still win if that's what it comes down to. But in most cases, it hasn't gotten to that point. But it is an encroaching system of anti-sovereignty, anti-individualism, anti-liberty, anti-freedom, and let's just be real, anti-human. And it's up to us to choose no, to say no, we are not going to do these things, and we are going to opt out. Because our spiritual evolution depends on this. Our spiritual evolution is not moving forward into this dystopia of total surveillance, digitalization, transhumanism. We choose no, we choose the other. We choose the natural way. We choose Earth's and Gaia's natural spheric, geospheric, biospheric, environmental system, not this artificial one that you're erecting. We don't choose it. We say no. And we're opting out. And you just better know that that's the case. And on an esoteric level, humanity needs to make that choice because it's coming at us fast, very fast, under the Trump administration, and it won't be long in terms of years, less than a decade likely, before this devolutionary digitalized control system is erected, and evolving spiritually becomes extraordinarily difficult, if not nearly an impossibility by 2040 or even 2035. That is what the millennials and Gen X and some of the baby boomers, but mainly the millennials and Gen X and Gen Z, that is our mission as the generations, adult enough that will be here once the baby boomers are gone, to and make sure that we stop this system from fully becoming completed. And doesn't matter what political side you're on, doesn't matter what race you are, we're all part of the fifth root race of spiritual cosmic evolution. There's all the root races, and we're all part of the fifth one, every one of us. And as an American, the next root race is coming into fruition here if we basically adjust our evolutionary path in this country specifically and allow that to come forth and manifest on the American continent. Otherwise, it's going to go elsewhere, basically, as far as I can tell. Maybe to Russia, maybe somewhere else. Maybe, hopefully, probably not China, but anywhere else but here, if we don't take control now, if we don't exert our sovereignty now in a fully unified, nonpartisan, apolitical effort to ensure that natural human sovereignty, what this country was founded upon, the sovereign individual. Don't argue with me on this. They couldn't do everything at once. They wanted to. They couldn't pull it off. But they were esotericists. Clearly, if you study the founding fathers, they were Freemasons and esotericists. They knew exactly what they were doing. And they knew that such a system had never, ever been erected before, and that it would be extraordinarily difficult to maintain. And as I was saying, our founding fathers knew exactly what they were doing. And they were Freemasons, they were esotericists, they were often deists, which goes hand in hand with a type of Freemasonry. And they knew how hard it would be to keep the constitutional democratic republic that they had created, that they had engineered with fail safes, three bodies of government: the legislative, the executive, and the congressional. So the judiciary, the Supreme Court, the Congress, and the executive branch under the president and the State Department. And the separation of powers and the checks and balances were a novel concept and framework for a nation that had never been orchestrated or generated ever before in the history of the world. Now, when they set out to do that, they were trying to create a type of nation that could have a esoteric and spiritual destiny and framework for spiritual individualization and growth that had never existed. They created one that allowed that type of spiritual evolutionary growth to be able to occur and not be subjected to despotic um, laws, despotic practices, regressive legislative practices, or theological and, you know, authoritarian decrees and harnessing of the individual's ability to choose what spiritual path is right for them. Obviously, they had experienced all those things to a staggering degree on the European continent and in Britain, where whichever one you want to call out, the Anglican Church, the Vatican, Catholicism, the Spanish Inquisition, whatever it was, the majority of the people that came to America in the beginning and founded this country initially and then created the actual constitutional republic, their ancestors were these people I'm talking about, who were, as far as I can tell, really were escaping theological despotism and an enormous level of religious persecution in whatever country they came from. So it was an imperative to these esoteric founders of our country to create an atmosphere, a constitutional republic with checks and balances, and a separation of church and state to ensure that the spiritual growth of individuals and the collective under the country that they were creating would be enabled and imbued with the ability to choose that spiritual evolutionary path for themselves as sovereign, divinely created beings, however they wanted to go about it. And that no group, no institution would be able to stop them from choosing that. And so, with that being the case, and that being said, and it's an important statement, an important concept to digest, that was a large part of the original intentionality behind our country was esoteric Freemasonry and the right of the individual to choose their spiritual path of evolution. And they didn't state it that way, obviously, but that is what it allowed, a type of spiritual manifest destiny for the sovereign individual in a nation and in a type of country that had never before existed, and one that they clearly wanted to escape from, which was in the opposite, and an inversion of that concept in Europe at the time. And here we are now with a far greater degree of control and technocratic despotism, which is becoming anti-human and anti-spiritual, that the American needs to rise up and understand that it will be taken from them, whether they're Christian, Muslim, New Age, esotericist, Freemason, Presbyterian or Catholic, or an atheist. You can't, your God will become a technocratic, artificial intelligent deity even if you're an atheist. Now, let's be real. So I implore the American citizens and those of the world to take back their spiritual evolutionary path and their own divine individual sovereignty as an individual and as a collective species, as the human race, and to choose that path for ourselves, because otherwise it'll be taken from us. And that's really all there is to say about that. And that is the heart of the matter right there. My name is Sam Robinson, and this is the Gnostic Syncretist podcast. And thank you for joining us tonight. And we'll be seeing you very soon on many other topics, including ancient Gnosticism and the several other schools of thought in the Gnostic field of antiquity, such as the Valentinians, the Chaldeans, the Manichaeans, and the Mandaeans. Those will be on our future podcasts, as well as many other topics of an esoteric nature. Thank you and good night.